So season 1 of HBO's The Last of Us show is finally over. So what did I think of it? Well, I thought it was pretty amazing. I'm a very big fan of The Last of Us games, so I am super happy that this adaptation is as good as it is. It's not a perfect show, I do have a couple issues with it, but I really enjoyed watching it. To start off, I'll just say that the cast was great. Everyone was giving a phenomenal performance. Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey as Joel and Ellie respectively were fantastic, and pretty much every character in the show was very well acted. I do not think there was a single bad performance here. The production quality was also amazing. The visuals, for example, looked great, and the visual effects look really good for the most part. They really nailed the look of the show. Everything looks like it came straight out of the game. I also just think they did a great job at adapting the first game's story. They stayed very faithful to it, but made plenty of changes that are for the most part pretty good. You'll see some scenes that are nearly identical to the game, some scenes that are very different, and even plenty of completely new scenes. These changes make it so it's not just a carbon copy of the game, so both the game and the show can be enjoyed as separate things. I also quite like how they toned down the violence in the show. That might not sound like a good thing, but it actually makes the moments of violence a lot more impactful in my opinion. Now, as I said, I do have some issues with the show. These are not super massive issues, but I still found them fairly noticeable. My first issue is with the pacing. It's not perfect. Now, I actually am pretty happy with the pacing for most of the show, but sometimes it does go a bit too fast. I think the show maybe should have had 1 or 2 more episodes, or at least have some episodes be a bit longer, because I do think the pacing can be a little too fast sometimes. My second issue is the lack of infected. Don't get me wrong, I fully respect the decision to focus mostly on the characters and to not just have constant zombie action, but I do wish the show had a couple more infected. I'm actually completely fine with the amount for most of it, and I think this show does do a good job at making them seem more dangerous, even in small numbers. However, in the last couple episodes, they just sort of disappear. After episode 5, there's only 2 more infected, both of those being in flashback sequences, so it really feels like they're just not really around anymore, which is a damn shame. I think the show would have absolutely benefited from having a couple more infected encounters, especially in the last couple episodes. These issues thankfully don't ruin the show for me. I do wish they weren't there, but I still think the show is great even with those problems. Now, to continue with this review, I thought I'd go over each episode and quickly give my thoughts on them. So let's begin. Episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness. A fantastic pilot episode. This episode is what immediately sold me on the show. They do such a great job at introducing everything. The talk show scene at the start, for example, is a great way of introducing the concept of the cordyceps. I also really like all of the added Sarah scenes. I think those are a very welcome addition and actually make her death a little more impactful. Overall, a fantastic introduction to the series. Episode 2, Infected. A solid continuation of the story. There's some great and intense scenes in this, like the museum scene with the clickers. I also really liked the opening scene in Jakarta, and it's kind of a shame they stopped doing those cold opens. Another thing they introduced with this episode was all the infected being connected, which is used pretty well in this episode but never comes up again, which is just kind of weird. Still a really good episode though. Episode 3, Long Time. An absolutely beautiful and heartbreaking episode. It's much more standalone and is very different from its game counterpart, but that is not at all a bad thing, because the story it tells is amazing and arguably even better than what's in the game. I'm also not ashamed to admit that this made me cry quite a bit. It's a fantastically written episode with some very strong performances from Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett. Definitely one of the best episodes of the whole show. Episode 4, Please Hold to My Hand. Another pretty solid episode. There isn't a whole lot that happens in this one since it's mostly set up for episode 5, but what's here is still pretty good. The scene of the guy dying and begging for his life before being killed by Joel was very intense and incredibly reminiscent of something you'd see in part 2. This episode also introduces the pun book from the game, which gives us some really nice Joel and Ellie bonding moments. So overall one of my least favorite episodes, but still really good. Episode 5, Endure and Survive. An amazing episode with an action-packed finale and an emotional ending. Henry and Sam were done really well here, and I got attached to them pretty quickly, which made it extra sad when they died. The big infected horde was also pretty cool, and it was awesome to finally see a bloater, even if it's the only time you actually get to see one in the show. The added scene of Ellie trying to heal Sam with her blood was also really great. This one is up there as one of the best episodes of the show. Episode 6, Kin. Another really good episode. Having it be set in Jackson instead of the power plant from the game was a really great change, and it allows for some really cool references to part 2, which was just awesome to see. The standout scene for me in this episode was definitely the talk that Joel has with Tommy. It's a very emotional scene and adds depth to Joel's character. I do have one issue with this episode, however, and that's how it ends. Joel getting injured is a very important scene and it just feels a little rushed here, which is a real shame. Outside of that though, this is just a great episode. Episode 7, Left Behind. I know some people were not huge fans of this episode, at least compared to the others. And while it's certainly one of the weaker episodes, I still really like it. I admit there's plenty of issues, but there's still a lot to like about it. Ellie and Riley's relationship, for example, is done really well here. It's a solid adaptation of the Left Behind story, which is all I really wanted it to be, so I can honestly look past its shortcomings and still really enjoy this episode. Episode 8, When We Are in Need. Possibly my favorite episode of the whole show. This one adapts one of the best chapters of the game, and it is done really well. Scott Shepherd's portrayal of David is brilliant. He's a bit different from his game counterpart, but he is just as terrifying, perhaps even more so. Bella Ramsey's Ellie also really shines here. This is probably the best she is in the whole show. I also really like the added scenes where we actually get to see David's group, which I always felt was missing from the game. I really don't have any complaints about this episode, it's just so great. Episode 9, Look for the Light. So here we are, the final episode. Did they succeed in adapting the ending? In my opinion, yes. I was a bit worried when I found out this was the shortest episode of them all, but it didn't feel nearly as rushed as I thought it was gonna be. Although, I do still wish the episode was longer. The opening scenes with Ellie's mom, Anna, were also a really cool addition, and her being played by Ashley Johnson, Ellie's actress from the game, was pretty awesome to see. Joel's rampage in the hospital was also a bit more shocking and effective in my opinion, because of how little violence they showed in the previous episodes. So yeah, I was pretty happy with the ending of the show, so let's move on to the conclusion now. So that was pretty much all I had to say about this show. As a big fan of the games, it was a joy to watch for me. It's also just so wonderful to see how popular this show became. There's so many more new fans of The Last of Us now, and that's just amazing. I'm also super excited for Season 2 since I am very curious to see how they'll adapt that story. So anyways, that was it for this video. Definitely let me know in the comments what you thought of the show, I would love to know. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye!